Thank you. Um, the West Bank is that large section that was set aside really for Israel, for Palestine, but in the 1967 war, Israel took it over and occupied it and has continued to occupy it ever since. So it is essentially under military and civil rule by the Israelis. The West Bank is divided into three major sections. A is the furthest to the west toward the Mediterranean. B is sort of down the middle. And C is the Jordan River Valley, the most fertile and productive land. C is where an awful lot of the Jewish settlements have been established, although they're all over the West Bank, so they're not just in Section C, but Section C was always regarded, or has been regarded, as in the area of the West Bank that would never be allowed to be further developed and occupied by Palestinians, but exclusively Israeli. Now, it's Palestinian land, theoretically, technically. But the Post reported that the decision had been made that up to 900 Palestinian homes might be authorized in Section C, which is a real kick in the teeth to the ultra-conservative Israelis who don't want to see that happen. Now, the interesting thing to know about that is that the 900 Palestinian homes that might be authorized, most of them are already there. They were built without permits. And many of the houses that are demolished by the Israelis are homes that the Palestinians have built to replace homes that were destroyed before, but the Israelis won't grant permits, building permits. So they go ahead and build a house anyway in order to live in someplace. Then the Israelis come along and destroy them again, but now they're considering authorizing up to 900 of those, which seems like a major concession, except at the same time, they are also authorizing 2,223 Israeli residences in the same sector. Now that kind of imbalance is really what we're wrestling with all the way through this. And I think is indicative of the imbalance that we keep running into. So that's not really about religion, but it's about the news that I wanted to share with you. Kind of an update. As far as the topic, I'm going to read a paragraph that I quoted in the summary that I issued. Statement made by Mohammed Galal Mustafa of the Washington Institute on the Middle East. He wrote, extreme religious Zionists in Israel increasingly see themselves as guardians and definers of how the Jewish state should be, and are very stringent when it comes to any concessions to the Arabs. On the other hand, Islamic groups in Palestine and elsewhere in the Islamic world advocate the necessity of liberating the holy territories and sites for religious reasons, and preach violence and hatred against Israel and the Jewish people. So there it is. I think he says in a few words very succinctly what the dilemma is. Now, a lot of people, I don't know if that's true or not, many of the people I've encountered in terms of my readings have the impression that the struggle, the conflict in Israel-Palestine is fundamentally a religious struggle. But I don't think that's true. I don't agree with that. Religion is very much a part of it, but technically, a religious struggle would be between two religions, or the adherents of two religions, over questions like whose religion is the truest, and which one has the most authority, which one is better than the other, which one should supersede the other. And that's the kind of religious struggle you often read about or hear about or experience. I don't think that's adequate today to explain what's going on in Israel-Palestine. As I said in one of my earliest sessions, probably the first one, this is really a territorial struggle over who's going to control this land and who's going to govern the people who live on it. And it's this existential struggle because both sides are in it in desperate attempt to survive. The Palestinians are under oppression, are desperate for a place of their own, and are chafing under the oppressiveness of the Israelis. That's what the Intifada was about, that we talked about last week. It was a people's rebellion against many of the restrictions, curfews, detentions, home destructions, et cetera, et cetera. So when we look at that whole picture, it seems to me, at least, that the struggle for territory, the struggle for security and survival take prominence over any religious enmities. But having said that, I immediately have to acknowledge that you can't remove religion from either of those first two. It's permeated with religious overtones and undercurrents. So while the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in my mind, is not a religious conflict per se, religion permeates it and is a driving force behind many, many of the issues that we've looked at and will encounter as we go on. So we're going to talk a little more about that tonight, about the role of religion in this struggle. And I said from antiquity to the present time, because if we look at the history of Jerusalem and the Holy Land, from our own readings of the Bible, the Old Testament stories, et cetera, we know that this has been a contested piece of ground from day one. When the Israelites, according to the old ancient stories, came out of Israel and wandered in the wilderness and eventually invaded Canaan, the land of Canaan, it was occupied. They were the original colonists, in a sense. They occupied the land of Canaan and took it away from those who had been living there and established themselves, as colonial powers are always wont to do. John? Yes?
I was going to say, when the Hebrews came out of Egypt, it doesn't seem appropriate to call them, to say that they then colonized Palestine or the Canaanites, because they weren't doing so from the base of another country. They were just roaming. They were not invading from another country. They were invading, but it's not like they were the Persians saying they were going to come and take over or something like that. It was definitely an invasion, but colonization implies by another power.
Would you be happy if I said Invaders?
No, but I'll live with it.
Well, I'll say invaders then, just to make you happy.
Thank you.
Now I don't know where I was going with that, so you'll have to take it from here.
You were talking about what happened when they went in and started to take the land of Canaan.
But the land has always been a scene of a struggle between powers, whether it was colonial powers or not, invading powers. Jerusalem itself has gone through the hands of, good grief, how can one even count the many times that Jerusalem has changed hands in terms of who lived there and who governed it? This land has been a land of conflict really from the word go, right? Anybody disagree with that? So it's got struggle in its veins. And religion has not always played a part in that. In fact, I don't think religion was all that important an issue through much of that history. Where it seems to me religion came in was when Islam rose in the 7th century. And Islam and Judaism began to live side by side. And then, of course, we had the other flow of powers that moved through there and the change of the guard, so to speak. Jerusalem changed hands umpteen thousand times, it seems, throughout history. First in one hand, then in the other. And where religion really starts becoming dynamic forces, I think, and this is a simplified understanding, I'm sure, but it was during the Crusades. When Christianity and Islam went toe to toe. And that was about religion. I'm going to stop there and just have you guys respond to that, because tell me what you think and where you are on this. How important has religion been in this conflict, in your understanding?
A whipping dog of convenience.
A whipping dog of convenience.
Yeah, you can always stir people up with religion.
Yeah.
I mean, Jerusalem was left alone. It was almost like an island. You know, the Hebrews went around it as they were taking possession of the land. I guess maybe it was David that eventually said, "Oh, I think let's go make that our capital." And the city of what came to be known as the city of David, and went back and attacked it. But initially it wasn't that important in terms of establishing themselves, quote, securely, unquote.
Okay.
But that was pre-Muslim times.
Yeah.
You're muted, Kathy.
You're muted. You're still muted. There.
Okay, sorry. Don, you were talking about the land and who got to live it and who got to use it and own it as being a big thing, but it seems to me that both religious groups go back to finding biblical texts or stories to justify their use of that land. So I don't know if you would call that religious based, but it certainly seems to be justified by their interpretations.
Could you give an example?
Well, the Christian view is that has been historically that Israel was a land appointed for the Jews.
Okay.
And I'm sure that the Jews have that same belief.
And to continue Kathy's thought, the Palestinians in 1948 were faced with a huge trauma. They were dispossessed from their land, and they often turned to their religion to justify the claim to the land. And between 1948 and 1973, the Palestinians and the Arab world denied the very existence of the state of Israel. They denied the existence of Zionism. They did not want to negotiate. They were not in favor of partition in 1948 or any time after, up until 1973. And then after 1973, even some of the religious folks in the Muslim community decided that it would be important to recognize the existence of Israel, because Israel, they recognized, was not going away. And if it wasn't going away, then the best way would be then to figure out a way for the two people to live together, one land for two peoples. And that principle also has support in the Hebrew literature as well as in the Islamic traditions.
Very good. Thank you, David. Any other comments on this?
I guess I got one, and it's just kind of from the point of view, if you look at the impetus for the formation of the state of Israel after World War II and the Holocaust, and the fact that there were a lot of folks already living there, and for them, it would be kind of like what happened when the Europeans came over to the US, what is now the US, and colonized it. You know, from their point of view, those are foreign invaders. They're coming from Europe, most of them. And, you know, what do you do when you're faced with an invader? You don't necessarily say, oh, yeah, sure, you come on down. So I don't know that that's religious. There used to be a fairly sizable Christian population in Palestine, and they often get overlooked in the West, which is real weird. We like to talk about the Muslims and the Jews, and we sometimes forget that there are fewer of them now, but there used to be quite a sizable minority, to be sure, but population of Christian Arabs living in Palestine.
Okay.
And I guess, you know, the basic question is, it's a moot point now because, like David said, they're not going away. But to, you know, just say, well, okay, you know, you should share. Well, you know, the Holocaust wasn't caused by the Palestinians, so they kind of felt like, shoot, you know, we're getting to pay for somebody else's sins, so to speak. And as far as the Crusades go, you know, it was religious to be sure, but on their way over, they also trashed, they trashed Jews in Europe and they trashed Orthodox. So was that about religion? Was it about a land grab? Were there mixed motives? I don't know, but I suspect there were.
Thank you, Mary. Would you say that, well, I guess I have proposed that religion wasn't the primary factor in setting up this conflict initially. Would you say that, what would you say is the role of religion today in either enhancing or obstructing the quest for peace? Short,
I
what,
would say Christian anti-Semitism is a major factor that prevents a reconciliation between Palestinians and Israelis. When Israelis hear the anti-Semitic movements in America and Europe, and when they hear the leaders of the state of Iran declare that they're going to wipe Israel off the planet, then they hunker down and they are even more unwilling to entertain the possibility of negotiations with the Palestinians. And I would say that Christian anti-Semitism is a major explanation for the rise of Zionism, because the Jews in Europe did not see Europe as a place where they could stay and live, and they had no other place to go. That's the argument that they made. And unfortunately, as Mary and others have said, the Palestinians became the victims of victims.
thank you, David. Yeah.
Don, just a comment. Looking at reviewing your tonight, and then what you're talking about now, Israelis and Palestinians, etc. My personal thing is that it's a lot to do in now times with the media and how it's portrayed. And the media wants you to believe one thing, you read it, it's one thing, and then, but it's rarely, in my mind, that you see. It's always the Israelis are the number one, and Palestinians. Israelis can do no wrong, so to speak, and then the Palestinians are there. But I recently, last year, I had a friend come over, and he was a Palestinian working on a fence. And I got into it and talked to him a little about it. And he said the same thing that you did. And one word, it's complicated. And it really went into depth. I didn't understand some of it, but it just goes back exactly as you've done, traced it backwards for years, then brought that to fruition. But again, I think it's unfortunate the media does what they do and portrays it away. And you really don't see, as several people have brought out, several congregants just in this conversation, the Christian side of it or some of the other different religions involved in this.
Okay, thank you, Brent. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would just comment that I haven't researched this angle on the whole situation in Israel, but I remember when the temple was destroyed back in 70 AD.
You were there. Right?
No. I remember that historical event, Don. At any rate, they talk about the diaspora of the Jews at that time. And so if you look at what's happened to the Jewish people around the world, when did anti-Semitism start to rear its ugly head? I just watched a show the other night on how the Dutch treated the Jews during World War II, and it was just very, very sad. Just basically turned a blind eye to the deportation of the Jewish people that lived in Holland. But where did that come from? What is the attitude toward the Jewish people over these last 2,000 years that has complicated this situation? Just a question.
I think it came from more than one spring, but one significant part was the notion, the false notion, but nevertheless the notion, somewhat reinforced by the book of Matthew, that it was the Jews that killed Jesus. And that was the paper-thin platform upon which subsequent persecution of the Jews took place and has been taking place for centuries. I mean, Russia's been conducting pogroms for I don't know how long. The Jews have been persecuted for centuries. Why? Well, from a religious sense, since that's what the theme is today, it's because of this false notion, supposedly rooted in when Barabbas and Jesus were up there on the balcony with, and what's his name? Who was it? Said, which one of these shall live? Who shall I grant amnesty to? And the crowd down below, supposedly spurred on by Jewish leaders, called for Barabbas to be set free because they wanted to get rid of Jesus. Barabbas, at least by reputation, was a pretty bad criminal. But they also supposedly at the time, who knows if it's true, said, you know, if this is a bad thing to do, then let it be upon us and I don't know how many generations of our children. I'm not quoting Matthew exactly correctly, but Don, jump in anytime and help me or not. But I think that's a big part of the root of anti-Semitism, which is an unfortunate word since Arabs are Semites too, but for being anti-Jewish.
Very good, John. I think the real culprit is the Gospel of John, which has even Jesus calling the Jews the handwork of Satan, and later on the killer of Christ. Born out of the New Testament, carried out in the life of the early church, all the way through the Middle Ages, ending in the Holocaust itself. Yeah, we had a class a couple of years back on the origins of anti-Semitism. Some of you were in that class. You should be all experts on this subject. Anyway, yeah. Where did anti-Semitism come from? Well, you can say it came out of the church. There might be other sources as well, but that's certainly a major one. So there's a piece of religion in the discussion. Other comments?
Well, it's certainly true that when certain Israelis talk about the more extreme Zionists, talk about rebuilding temple and, thereby getting rid of the mosque that's been there for a long, long time, that is used to rouse up the rabble. They don't want that mosque destroyed. It's like the third holiest place in Islam, maybe the second holiest place in Islam, you could argue. So destroying it would, it makes a great thing to get people all riled up. And hopefully they won't actually ever do that, but if they do, anyway, not good.
Can't help but make me wonder what, and I don't know how you could come up with an answer, but I can't help but wonder how the Jews of the time resident in and around Jerusalem must have felt when that mosque was built on that site, which was a very holy site for them. I'm not suggesting, therefore, okay, this is all the fault of the Muslims. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's the same thing in reverse. That's this whole history has been a flip-flop of, okay, it's our turn to do to them, and now, okay, it's their turn to do to us. There is a passage in the Quran, in the beginning of the Quran, which quite explicitly states, and remember, this is supposedly the word of God, that the people of the book shall be respected. And the people of the book is taken to mean the Old Testament and the New Testament, Jews and Christians. Of course, it has also been given short shrift as well over time, but it seems that the Bible and the Quran and other such works contain writings of convenience when the time comes. I'm sorry, but there are certainly things in the Bible and that, well, I don't know if I should get off of this, but the whole notion, for example, of slavery. Does anyone listening here think that the God they believe in is a God that endorses slavery? I don't think so. And yet the Old Testament, the Torah, is filled with citations of God giving rules about how slaves should be treated, not how slaves should be set free, although there are occasions where it touches on that. But in principle, it doesn't have God saying to these people who were in bondage in Egypt. I mean, you talk about preaching to the choir. It doesn't say to them, you know better than anyone else how awful slavery is. No, it talks to them, because it was sort of the convention of the times. Everybody's got slaves, about how to treat your slaves. And there are lots of rules about how to treat your slaves. Have we been getting it wrong all these years, or have I got it wrong?
No, you got it right.
Religious writings are a matter of convenience when you want to make your point about, okay, this is ours, or God promised us this. See, it says so right there. And this is, religion has been abused in that sense.
Or used. There's a saying, religion is embraced by the believer, scoffed at by the skeptic, and used by the politician. So a religion has been abused, it's been used, even Jesus never condemned slavery. In fact, he spoke supportingly of it in several instances.
Not only that, he, you help me out again here, Don, but I don't know, I think it's Matthew again. He was saying with regard to the passage where he was saying, I didn't come to change the law, but to extend it or fulfill it. He then went on to say, not one jot, not one iota of the law, which means the Torah will change from now till the end of time. Well, there's some stuff in the Torah that's pretty rough.
Sure is. Question. Do you see religion as being helpful or a hindrance in the struggle to find peace in the Middle East now?
Yes.
That wasn't a yes or no question. Do you see religion as being a positive or a negative in the search for peace in the Middle East?
Well,
If you
which
took,
religious cloak you want to put on.
Who else was trying to speak?
this is Jenny, if you took Jerusalem out of the equation,
Then what? If you
it
took,
would be easier.
I'm still not sure what you're saying. Take Jerusalem out of the equation, then what?
Well, I don't think people would be as hard-nosed about their rights, their religiously endowed rights to property.
So you're equating Jerusalem with religion.
Yeah, I think that's where, I mean, look at what the latest quarrel was about, the latest conflict. It was because the Israelis were trying to prevent the Palestinians from having access to Jerusalem by closing off, by putting some settlements up there. I think if Jerusalem was not in the equation, that would be a really tough nut gone. But you know, that's not reality. But sure, I think it would make it simpler.
Okay.
I think that, you know, you can imagine the best possible world to settle this would be if it wasn't religious at all. And if you could divorce yourself from the religious history and consider this a purely secular argument about how to settle this land, and you could take it to mediation, and you wouldn't have all the external forces that are awash on all the people that are trying to figure out what to do, because they're under various pressures, religious pressures, from, as David was saying, from Christians in America, from others, you know, to do it this way, to dig in your heels, to be tough. So I think religion, the whole thing is, as you said, is awash in religion. And I'd like to just imagine what it would be like if there were no religion involved and this was just a secular disagreement among peoples. What could happen? You know, it would seem to me that it could be worked out. You could take it to the UN. You could do all kinds of things that might solve the dispute. So there's no question that religion has everything to do with it, I think.
I would take it the other way,
Yeah.
Martin. I would go completely the opposite direction and say if both entities use religion as religion really is, to love thy neighbor, to respect other people, if religion were truly used as the tool that it's supposed to be to guide us in how to live with each other, it could be solved.
You and I are in nirvana. I mean, I agree. That would be good.
I am in nirvana, but I mean, if you talk about religion, truly religion, I think what's being done here is that religion has been politicized. And so it's not truly religion that is at war here. It's politics. It's a land grab. Those are things that are being fought here. It's not religion that's at war.
It's pretty hard to separate the two.
Actually, and you could help me out here, maybe David or anyone else who remembers the precise resolution, whatever it was, 181, the thing that originally established in the UN, the state of Israel, and how it should be, quote, carved up, the Palestine, and how it should be carved up and establish the state of Israel, and technically a state of Palestine. I think if I remember, if memory serves me correctly, and here's where I need help. They carved out Jerusalem and said that it was to be an international city, I think governed by the UN.
That's correct.
Which was an attempt to remove it from this contentiousness. And that didn't work out very well, but it would seem that the parties involved don't want to do it that way.
There has never been a carving up of land done by I'll call colonial powers, that has been successful. It is never, whether it was in Africa, in Asia, in any part of the world, none of them have ever been successful because they're not looking at truly what would be beneficial to the people. Those were always looking at the colonial interests.
Mm-hmm.
One could argue that's the history of the world.
Yes,
the
it is.
boundaries that we see today are boundaries that have been fought over. The definitions of countries were not what they were 100 years ago or several hundred years ago. There is almost, I'm hard pressed to think of a country that is not what it is today, except because of battles that took place and formed it that way.
Yeah.
Maybe Iceland might be an exception, but I'm not sure. And maybe Australia. Anyway, it's
No way. They had people there before the Brits came over.
There you go. There you go. See, that's the history of the world. That's what we humans do.
I'm going to go back to Martha's point about if religion was treated as religion, not as a tool to acquire our own selfish ends, you'd have a different situation. Jenny's point, if you could get Jerusalem out of the picture, peace would be easier to come by. The UN, in its, I think, wisdom, saw the necessity of making Jerusalem an international zone to be overseen by the international community because of all of the holy sites that are situated in Jerusalem on both sides, Muslim as well as Christian and Jew. All three major faiths look to Jerusalem for some of their most holy sites. So by making it an international zone, they were trying to take religion out of the equation. In a sense, take Jerusalem out of the equation, but it didn't work. Israel now controls all of Jerusalem, east and west. And some of the last Gaza war was probably instigated in East Jerusalem between the Palestinians and the Jews.
Well, Israel's just too greedy. That's the problem.
I want to go back to something that I think is germane here. In 2008, a guy by the name of Charles Kimball published a book that was entitled When Religion Becomes Evil. And in that book, he identifies 5 warning signs.
Mhm.
The first warning sign that a religion is going bad is when it claims to have the absolute truth.
Mhm.
Second sign is when its adherents accept that truth blindly. Blind obedience. Third sign is, let's see now, don't fail me, brain. The third sign is, shoot, I hate these things.
Go get the book.
Yeah, it's in the other room. First sign is absolute truth, blind obedience. Establishing an ideal timeline within which your predictions, your religious predictions, are all going to come true. Fourth one, then, in that context, is the end justifies any means. And the fifth sign is the declaration of holy war. Now, if you stop and think about that, you can track that in just about any conflict where religion is involved. It's a claim to absolute truth on both sides among the Messianic Jewish Zionists and the fundamentalist Islamic Muslims. Absolute truth. Blind obedience, that is, you don't question it. Adherence on both sides.
Let's not forget the one true church.
End justifies any means. When you get to that point, you don't worry about hitting below the belt. The third, I'm sorry, I jumped one. The third is you set up a timeline. Both sides have a timeline. The Jews believe that all of Israel must be under Israeli Jewish domination in order for the Messiah to come and the end of the age. So do the Muslims. Believe that all of this Holy Land must be under Islamic control in order for the final day to come. So do Christians. Zionists and Christian adherents of this. Any means is justified by the end. That's where we see the atrocities that occur, the horrible things done in the name of God, in the name of believing. So the question is part of our problem, not only in the Middle East, but in many other places? We could name the United States of America right there too,
You're good.
where religion is a problem, not a solution, because it's gone bad. It's not what Martha says religion is intended to be, to bring us to God and to one another.
So can we quote you as saying that you want religion to be outlawed in the US?
You do, I deny it. So respond to that. What do you think about that?
If you're trying to talk, Brent, you are muted.
I think Brent froze up.
Mm.
Someone else.
I do think that Martha's point needs to be at the center of our conversation.
Okay.
Because as progressive Christians, I think we believe that God made human beings in the image of God and that we are commanded to love one another. When I talk with Muslims, they argue that Islam is a religion of peace. When I talk with my Jewish friends, they argue that Judaism is a religion of peace. That's how many Jews see their tradition. Many Muslims see their tradition the same way that Martha does. And I think we as progressive Christians have an obligation to make sure that we advocate a view of religion and of Christianity that's consistent with what Martha has said.
Very good. How do we do that? And who's going to listen to us?
Well, as citizens, we should insist that we not fund Israel to the tune of $3 billion a year, and that the Palestinians need a plan. We need to be able to figure out a way to bring the people together by changing their material circumstances. As long as Gaza remains an open prison, as long as Palestinians in the state of Israel remain second-class citizens and have no access or little access to schooling and good housing, and in Gaza in particular, the things they need to live, water and housing, they're going to be prompted to move in the direction of violence.
Well, I think you've got a major disruption going there.
Somebody's speaking, but I can barely hear you. Who's that? Bob?
Yeah.
The major problem you have recently is Iran stirring it all up to their own benefit. And everyone's using that as a club. The Palestinians and the Israelis are using the interference of Iran to stir things up. I think your key here, frankly, is Iran. And being a pseudo-scientist, one of the things I've discovered is very rarely do you find any absolutes in science. It's always changing.
Thanks, Bob.
Well, I think the question that you posed to David is, how do we do what Martha's talking about? is the $10 million or whatever number question for all of us all the time.
Yeah. We can't just say it's a question of living your religion, because a lot of people are, and they're driving us all to hell. So it's got to be something other than that. What's the key?
Well, you touch upon the fact that when you say a lot of people and then fill in the blank, it's going to be very difficult to get our government to do X, Y, or Z when there are a lot of people who don't want to do X, Y, or Z, or do. It's to get an action taken by the US government, which is going to be supported by everyone in this country, is it's hard to imagine such an action. I mean, I was thinking you were touching, Jenny was talking about, and also David, about the money aspect. I find it hard to see how we could stop giving Israel $2 billion of the $3+ billion that they're getting, because we promised that to them and the Egyptians to get them to have a peace treaty, and it's held. And we pay them each $2 billion a year to that end. So it'd be hard to see us backing out of that. But the rest of the money, are you saying that maybe what we should say is, okay, we're not going to help Israel any more than we've already promised to, and we're not going to help the Palestinians. We're going to withdraw until and unless you guys stop fighting. Then we'll be glad to help. I mean, except that how can you get the US government to say that when there is no unanimity, when there isn't even a majority of people in the country who want to do that? The US government can't act just because we tell it to, although that's an interesting idea. But anyway.
Jenny.
Yeah, I think a step before we get our country to do something is for us as the UCC, we look at the stance that we've taken over the last decades, and we ask ourselves, do we promote peace in that? Do we promote love? Do we promote how we should fundamentally be treating each other? And do we make the point that Martha made? And so then we ask for books to be shared in Palestine, and we ask for water to go to the people in Gaza, and we ask for humanitarian things, and we become a voice that gives that position as a counterbalance to all those other statements being made by the Zionist Christians and everybody else.
I tend to think in smaller dosages, the ones that I can digest. And I think about the song that we all close our eyes and we sing with such fervor, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. And I think that for me, it does begin with me educating myself, with me trying to live out the principles. And that sounds like a really naive thing, but I really don't think it is. If every person who confessed to be a Christian on this planet would truly live out Christian ideals, our governments would do what we told them to do. But we don't. We're pseudo-Christians. And we're Christians when it benefits us, and when it doesn't, we become whatever else there is, capitalists or Zionists or whatever. I think it has to begin with each one of us living out truly what God expects us to be.
And what if each of us has a different idea of what that is?
If we each lived it out in love, it could be different and it would still be peaceful, I think.
What kind of answer do you think if you asked an evangelical Christian that?
I think evangelical Christians, well, the non-fanatic type, that's a difficult question for now, because there are people who call themselves evangelical Christians who I think have gotten wrapped up in a world that is not real.
Yeah, that's the ones I'm talking about.
Yeah. That world is as difficult to tackle as the Zionists who want to go out and with all the fervor that they can and impose themselves upon others. And the only thing, and I know this all sounds really naive, but the only thing that I can think of is to treat them with love. You know, David Hazen always says, love wins in the end. Love is the only thing that wins. I think he's right.
I don't think it's at all naive what you're saying at all. I think that really is our future, is love. And I do think, though, that, and I think it begins with us. And in many of us, it means a transformation, a spiritual transformation to start manifesting the love. And from there, you know, we can congregate. And as Jenny was saying, you know, congregate and make plans and make a strategy and try to get it out further than just us, but as a group. And I think if things spread that way, and so we don't just have to stay at home and bring the beloved community into our hearts and live there, we can take the beloved community out and help transform other souls, other minds and hearts, is what I think. I think that's how nonviolence works. I think that's how change happens for the positive. And so, I mean, I really think Jenny's got the ideas, you know, the idea would be to show a different way of being in this conflict, you know, just as we showed a different way because, well, apartheid was an example that many of us showed something different and the pressures built.
But if memory serves me correctly, we don't have to be all flowers and gun barrels and kumbaya. Wasn't it Jesus who said we have to be as cunning as a fox?
That's strategy.
Exactly. It's not just love. It's got to have a construct behind it, an architecture, a goal. It has to be well thought out.
That's right.
But thought out in love.
Right.
Most of the time.
All the time.
All of the time.
I think that all works well if you have the same framework, the same frame of reference. But I'm thinking now of a Islamic jihadist in the Taliban. They are fired up with great fervor to bring in the kingdom of Allah according to Sharia law. And they're doing God's will. What do you do with people like that? Just as sincere as any progressive Christian could ever be.
I think they're proposing Shiite law rather than Shia, but yeah, Shia. They're Shiites, they don't follow the Iranian notion of Muslims. They follow.
And then they're not Shiites if they're Iranians or Shiites.
Well, in any event, they don't want women to have an existence.
I'm just quoting what I read. Sharia law.
Oh, Sharia law.
Sharia.
Shira, what did I say? Shira?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well,
Sharia.
Don, you're taking this to an extreme, it seems to me, because I mean, I know that those things exist, but you know, we also have Proud Boys in this country, and you know, it's not exactly like we can go transform one by having a conversation. But I know many Muslims who are as peaceful and loving as we are, and so I don't think it represents the majority of Muslims or Islams or Hindus, et cetera. You know, I think that's a minority.
So what you're suggesting is search out those who are of like mind and heart.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
So what you meant, but Martin, try it again, please.
I'm saying that there's always going to be a extreme on either side that you'd best just realize you're not going to convert, touch, be able to deal with. What you really want to talk with are the persuadable middle, people that haven't could go either way, need more information, and have a heart, and you can touch because they have the same sort of heart that we do. And so there are hardcores on either side. And I'm not saying we have to convert or change those people in order to have a better world and to resolve conflicts. Those people may always be on the outside, punching at the membranes to try to get in or try to agitate. But I don't think that converting those people is the answer.
All right, so when it comes to the conflict in Israel-Palestine, we're really dealing with a conflict between the extremes. You've got that whole middle section of folk who want peace, who wanted things to get worked out. But they're not the ones calling the shots. Next week, we're going to look at the rocky road to peace and why it is so difficult. And part of the reason is because it's the extreme edges that rule. And to
Don.
just set that aside and say, we don't want to deal with the extremes. Let's deal with the comfortable, nice, lovey, judgy center. That's not real either.
I'm not so sure. I don't agree.
Well,
Don.
good. Then we got a conversation.
I would just say that one more thing, and I'll shut up, is that it always comes back to me when we were thinking about bombing Iraq, back in 2001 or 2 or something, and the Christian Ministerial Association in Iraq beseeched Bush, came out and said, you don't want to do this. What you really want to do to change the situation here is to build up the middle class. You need to build up the middle class because we have a very strong middle class with all sorts of people, professors and professionals and all sorts of people. And so the US didn't listen to that and they went to violence. And I think that's kind of a knee-jerk reaction that a lot of us have, that we got this jihad, we gotta do something about that violently. Whereas building up the middle and with love and a strategy and constructive strategy may be what we need more of, to touch those people.
Dana had her hand up.
Dana.
Well, I just want to speak to the disenfranchised amongst us, who I feel like it can be made, we can make that generalization that if you are on the fringe, perhaps there is a threat of disenfranchisement, and I am different, I am separate amongst most that are on the extreme edges. And so I do feel like if you can make a difference in coming from love with extremes, to look at what caused that disenfranchisement. Thinking about Proud Boys as an example, we weren't born disenfranchised. We weren't born on an extreme. And so something has happened to have people be jihadists or to be Zionists, that movement. And so I think that, again, yes, I hear the Nirvana and the Pollyanna, but I don't think that is an unreasonable destination to address that. And it has to be addressed. I mean, those extremes are amongst us. And so there's a little bit of both of that going to the larger middle, but we can't just forget about our extremes, because you know what? We all have them. We're people. We've got those extremes. We know what that looks like. And fortunately, maybe we had a community that brought us back into the fold. So I think it's okay to look at the extremes. I don't know how to do that, but I don't think we just write off, because then nothing's ever going to happen.
Well, there's been some really wise insights and comments shared tonight. I really appreciate every one of you tonight. This has been most interesting and I think enlightening, at least for me. We're past the hour, so I'm going to call time on it.
We aren't going to make Jonathan say something?
Only if he wants to.
I think we should force
He's a preacher. He shouldn't have to talk every time. You got something you want to say, John?
I would need the framework of the question to be able to enter into the
Yeah.
discussion in a way that is, I just appreciate what's being said. It's obvious to all of us that this is not simple. And, as far as how we can help a situation that is highly disturbing in a lot of ways. So thank you for leading the discussion, Don.
You bet. Well, next week, we're going to talk about that final question, what is peace and where does it lie and how do we get a hold of it? Not that we're the ones who are going to make it, but the question always is before us. For me, it's this question. Who is a modern day peacemaker? What does a modern day peacemaker look like, sound like, act like? And now I'm going to share a bias I have. Whenever I ask myself that question, I always think of Martin Jones. So I'm not trying to put any weight on you, Martin, but there it is.
You mean this, me? There's a lot of Martin Joneses on Facebook.
Martin Jones I'm looking at right now. I always think of you. Now, I don't know why exactly, but I think of you.
I put Martha Moultrie in that picture too.
Question, what does a modern day peacemaker look like, act like, sound like?
So that means you both have to show up next week with halos.
Martin,
Or the solution, whatever comes first.
Martin, I'd like you to be a key player in that and helping us unpack that, not just
I'll have the answers next week.
not just about you personally, but what does a modern day peacemaker look like, sound like, behave like? That's going to be our question. All right.
All right.
Thanks a lot. See you next week.
I know.
Thank you, Don.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Don.